First up, wherever you are, I hope all of you are staying safe, staying indoors, staying healthy. It's a very pleasant duty for me to introduce the very distinguished panel today. I'd like to start with Harshita Srivastava. Harshita is a partner with Nishit Desai Associates. She's a partner responsible for startups and venture capital investments at the firm. Harshita, interestingly, used to work for Nexus Venture Partner. So she's got a very unique perspective here, both from an investor angle and obviously now in her capacity as a corporate lawyer. Welcome, Harshita. I'd like to next introduce Aprajit, who is a partner with DSK Legal. Aprajit is largely focused on corporate commercial, on M&A work, and on private equity. He is an award-winning lawyer, and he has received several recognitions from Chambers Asia, Global Legal 500, and so on. Aprajit sits on the boards of several companies, but the one I thought was really interesting is that he's on the board of Sight Life, which is an NGO that is dedicated to eliminating corneal blindness. Welcome, Aprajit. I'd like to now introduce Ramesh Vaidyanathan, who is the founder and managing partner of Advaya Legal. Ramesh, again, has been a partner in private practice in the past before he decided to take on a corporate role. He has been the general counsel for Mumbai International Airport, and he was the group counsel for GVK Group. Ramesh's area of interests are focus on amalgamations, joint ventures, project financing, infrastructure, aviation, and franchising. He currently is an office bearer of the Asia Pacific Regional Forum of the International Bar Association. Welcome, Ramesh.
Thank you.
Last but not the least, my good friend Aaron Solomon, who is currently the managing partner of Solomon & Co., one of the oldest law firms in the country. Aaron's special area of focus is joint ventures, exchange control regulations, competition law. Among his several other positions that he holds, he is also an advisory member of the China East Asia International Trade Dispute Settlement Advisory Committee. Incidentally, Aaron Solomon is an examination topper. He held the #1 rank in the All India Solicitors exam in 1996. Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you.
Right. So a quick introduction to the flow of the program today. What we'll be doing is I'm going to invite each of our panelists to probably share their opening remarks about maybe about 3 to 4 minutes each. So that'll probably take us about 15 odd minutes. So with those few words, if I can please start with Harshita, and if I can request the panelists to really kind of talk about what are the themes that you're hearing about from your clients. What are the top concerns on their minds? And now that we're kind of seeing the issues kind of pan out over the last 3 to 4 weeks, are you also able to give us a high-level view of what are the kind of solutions that you're recommending to the clients, and what kind of decisions are your clients beginning to take with regard to dealing with the legal fallout? What do you wish?
Thank you, Venkat. Thank you for the great introduction to all of us. I would start off by saying that, of course, a lot has changed, and in the last month or so, and it wouldn't be exaggerating if I mentioned that in the most literal sense, the world probably has stopped for a lot of us. As a result of some of the preventive measures which have been taken by government bodies across the globe, to control the pandemic, I believe small businesses, startups, and entrepreneurs are essentially, they have come out to be essentially one of the most vulnerable groups that have been directly affected, by these measures. Whether it is the preventive measures or the general chaos around the situation, I think COVID-19 has caused extreme, disruption both socially as well as economically for all of us here at least. Now, diving directly into the topic, which is what are the kind of questions that I've been receiving from clients in the, who are also, and specifically entrepreneurs dealing with the COVID-19 situation. I think 4 broad heads, if I can quickly point out. One is in terms of the supply chain breakdown, and what are the how are they going to help, what are the recourses that they have under their supplier customer contracts, and we can I'll deal with it in terms of the force majeure that Venkat was mentioning, and whether you have such clauses, whether you don't have a contract at all, etc. Second bit would be the employees, which is whether to terminate, whether to pay them, whether not to pay them. What do you do with the new hires that you have agreed to onboard during this period, and the lockdown happened, whether you really are in a position financially to onboard new talent, or how do you deal with that situation? The third has been around rents, which is whether you're in a landlord position or a tenant position. I would assume a large part of this audience would be in the latter position, where you are occupying a premise on a leave and license basis. What do you do? Can you seek a waiver of the rents that you are paying, whether your contracts allow you to do that? And if your landlords aren't agreeing, do you have a legal recourse against them? And I think the fourth one that I have been getting a lot of queries on is essentially compliance relaxations. So is there something that the government is doing to ease the compliances which are which are required to be done by companies under Companies Act, under foreign exchange control laws, etc. So I think broadly, to deal with these four situations, Venkat, do I need to deal with these four situations right now, or should we take it up in the course of the session?
I think we'll probably pick it up during the course of the session. But
Yep.
thank you for providing that overview, Harshita. If I can please come across to you, Aparajit, is your experience similar to Harshita? Are these kind of the four buckets in which most of the client issues seem to be falling into, or do you see some other areas as well?
Thank you, Venkat. Thank you, Harshita. I think I would echo what Harshita's said, and primarily the issues that corporates or startups or entrepreneurs are facing today are more or less on the same lines. Mostly what we have been dealing with, the queries which started from around mid-March, around the third week of March, have been primarily in relation to manufacturing facilities and continuing with manufacturing operations. Situation was different, a little bit different prior to 20th of April, as we all know. Things have been relaxed a bit post 20th of April, then the advisory and the queries around that. Employees have been a big chunk, and specifically pay to employees and the the uncertainties around it, as well as the variety of notifications that have been issued all at the central government level as well as the state government level. Insurance, disruption of business and insurance claims around that has been a piece also that we've been advising clients on. Rest, I think Harshita covered leases, financing moratorium, what the relaxation, that RBI has proposed and the nuances around it. I think broadly it's been around manufacturing, supply, employees, insurance, property, lease, and financing. I would say from a business standpoint. And as you said, of course we can deep dive into each one of these items as we progress in the discussions. For now, I would pass it back to you.
Got it. Thank you, Aparajit. Aaron, Ramesh, if I can come over to you, and once again, are there any other categories of issues that you're hearing from clients? But if I can please request you to maybe focus your comments a little bit more on, are you beginning to see potential solutions, or at least trends in solutions that clients are choosing to adopt to face some of these issues? And are you able to kind of give us an overview of what these solutions really are?
So thanks for having me on this panel, and thanks for joining in large numbers. I think with the number of attendees, it says a lot in terms of our people and a nation in terms of continued learning, even in the course of this lockdown. And Venkat, to respond to your question, I would just maybe back up to, I would say, the beginning of March. I think most of our clients were confused on what should I be doing to tackle this issue. Maybe now it's evolved to a phase where most businesses have an idea of what they do want to do. They do want to defer certain payments. They do want to defer certain costs. They do want to renegotiate certain contracts. So I think most business owners do have clarity on how they're going to tackle the current challenge. I see it possibly evolving to a third stage, which we're seeing early days of, where most businesses are now beginning to consider what do we do after we come out of this lockdown? What is the path forward? And that's exactly, I think, what Venkat touched upon. And I think again, we'll be talking about multiple different things. Clearly, in large numbers, most clients and businesses have opted for the moratorium offered by the Reserve Bank of India. And many of the relaxations coming out of the Ministry of Finance are all being opted for. as a matter of course. I think what is also important to keep in mind is many Indian businesses are looking at this as an opportunity. They realize they're going to be coming out in a new world, in a new economic environment, and they're going to have to do things differently. So one part of our discussion would be in terms of to deal with the present and the past, and how do we re-engineer it to meet the challenges, of the current time and going ahead. But two, what is also very important is the way forward, and how do we re-engineer and rework our business and relook at our contracts and commitments, so we are best placed to take best advantage of and grow in a new market condition. I think it's very important to keep in mind that some of the world's biggest manufacturing companies grew after World War II. And while there's certainly distress and stress assets and companies and businesses in trouble, it is also possibly, there will come a time where there's opportunity, and the companies who handle it well, financially, legally, and most importantly, from a business perspective, there's definitely opportunity to succeed.
Got it. Thank you, Aaron. Ramesh?
Yeah, thanks, Venkat. I think my thoughts are similar to what Harshita mentioned in terms of the the kind of questions that we are fielding from clients. And you would typically expect a force majeure clause, as always lawyers call it, like a boilerplate clause, and you would probably not spend a lot of time negotiating it. So I think one immediate, if you say one big learning or course correction as far as this is concerned, is the focus on good contract. I think that's, if you ask me, this tremendous visibility on the need to build good contracts by getting expert inputs. So I think that's, if you ask me, that's one thing that has kind of become highlighted. In terms of what we're telling clients, to some of the questions that are some of the issues that have come up, is essentially to communicate more. Essentially, be it in terms of employees, be it landlords, be it whoever the counterparty may be, your supplier, vendor, without jumping into a force majeure notice or a termination notice, or really an email suggesting pay cuts. Are you able to kind of drill down the seriousness of the issue and a sense of partnership through effective communication? That's something that we're saying. And secondly, that communication being right, something which doesn't spread panic, but at the same time, if it's something that that's let's say notifying a landlord or notifying an employee, you're making sure that you've checked with your experts, and you're not confusing your financial constraint with other things like force majeure. So I would say, in terms of, I don't want to repeat what's already been mentioned, but in terms of the solutions, they're not really emerging as of now, but the expectation is that with communication, with a bit of patience, and continuing to engage with vendors and counterparties, I think that's a key step that we are telling clients. And the reason why it's probably too early to look at solutions is there's been a lot of inconsistency in some of the notifications that have come out. So there's a bit of speculation on who's covered, who's not covered. So it may be too soon to to really plan any remedial action based on the inputs that we currently have. So mitigate the risk and stay where you are, and then keep plugging on. So that's the kind of advice that we've been giving clients. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramesh. So if I could probably kind of kick off the set of questions that I had, starting with you, Ramesh. So you kind of briefly alluded to force majeure. So for the benefit of the participants, are you able to give us a quick summary of what exactly does this clause mean? And are you able to give us some ideas in terms of whether it's there seems to be a lot of hope in corporate India that this clause will kind of come to their rescue when it comes to possibly, if I may use the word, flexibility in terms of getting out of certain types of contracts. So specifically with regard to employment contracts, is force majeure a clause that is a tool that's really kind of available with employers at all?
So the answer is generally speaking no, because you would typically not find a force majeure clause in an employment contract, and you would typically find that in other types of contracts. So that's more in the context of employment contracts. But generally speaking, I mean, force majeure has obviously been interpreted by courts over the years to basically look at scenarios that the parties did not contemplate at the time of contracting, something which is impossible to perform. So essentially, if you look at the law on this, it's contained in Section 32 and Section 56 of the Contract Act, and to the extent it's part of the contract, it's covered by Section 32, and to the extent it's extraneous to the contract, where you're actually looking at impossibility of performance, you're looking at Section 56. But I don't want to get too much into the legalese, because I gather the audience is more business and non-lawyer. So therefore, I'd probably say that to be very specific to your question, it's a very challenging task to invoke force majeure successfully. And while in the last few weeks, the Delhi High Court and the Bombay High Court have come to the rescue of certain parties by giving them the benefit of force majeure, but those are more in the nature of interim orders for balancing equities. Those are not really, principles where you can say this COVID situation would qualify as a force majeure scenario, because force majeure is a very, very situation-specific clause. A COVID may perfectly apply to a particular scenario which involves, let's say, going out and performing some activity which is constrained by vehicular movement or aircraft movement and things like that. May be completely inapplicable in a case where such travel or such constraints are not relevant. So that's one thing. And secondly, in the context of, for example, I'm presuming you'll go into the landlord issues and all that. But to the extent, these are temporary in nature, and there is a chance that it could be revived. You would still not get the benefit of force majeure. But I must say that everything will depend on what you say in the contract. So I don't know if that answers your question.